Hello, fellow fragrance lovers and enthusiasts. Welcome back. It's good old Benjamin here at the Centaur Fragrance Channel, coming back at you. Y'all know what it is, another fragrance video. Today is a fragrance chat. I haven't done one of these in a long time, and I love to sit down with y'all. You know, let's all sit down, let's have a chat, let's have a conversation, and I want to get some of your feedback and thoughts with this topic. So I'm going to tell y'all the secret sauce. I'm going to tell y'all the magic behind my little mind and the gears that are going on, and how I rate fragrances, how my thoughts on fragrances, and how I really piece together my fragrance reviews. Not editing wise or anything like that, but what's going on in the mind right here with Benjamin. So first off, what I do when I review a fragrance is I get the fragrance, of course, I buy it or however I get it, and I sit down with the fragrance, and I do try to look into the perfumer. I try to look into the history of the company. I don't always do that. I'm not a historian. I do like history, but sometimes I don't feel like that matters as much. It is really important to look into some brands like Guerlain. It can be very fascinating and fun to dive into that rabbit hole to see different perfumers coming through different houses and the story. Sometimes perfumers actually move from house to house, and the influence and the fragrances that they made, throughout their life as a perfumer is very fascinating. But when I look at fragrances, I mostly care about how the fragrance smells. When I rate a fragrance, of course, the presentation is very secondary. But if it's a niche fragrance, I think it's very important to take into account the presentation, because the presentation sends you a message. It tells you, it tells me how the fragrance is supposed to smell, what kind of luxury it is, what's the message, what's the image, what's the emotion of the brand. When I look at Jubilation or Amouage fragrances, when I look at my beautiful Jubilation 25 bottle, I see pure class. I see Arabian, nobility and of Oman, and I see exotic riches, and that, to me, the quality and the prestige of that bottle really speaks to what the juice inside. And every single type of bottle is hopefully well thought out. Hopefully the brand put in some effort, and the package, everything from the packaging to the bottle to even the color of the juice reflects what's going on inside and reflects the company as a whole. So when I actually sit down and try the fragrance, of course I pay attention to things like the opening, the mid, the dry down. You have to understand, that the fragrance has the change. You have to wear the fragrance a couple of times. I try to wear fragrance at least a week at minimum to get out a fragrance review to you guys. Y'all, that can take a lot of time. Sometimes I want to put out a lot of content for y'all. Sometimes I feel like I want to rush things. Sometimes I'm excited about a fragrance and I think it's the most beautiful thing ever. And sometimes I really do understand a fragrance after wearing it for 3 times. Especially if it's a designer fragrance with not a lot of complexity, and maybe it's out of a similar line and it didn't change things a lot. Another flanker that just was kind of the same old, same old. I can understand that fragrance after wearing it 3 times. But with other fragrances, I sometimes might even feel like I need to wear them more than 7 times. I might need to wear them longer than a week. So that definitely goes into my fragrance reviews. And sometimes I want to feel in the right mood. I want to be in the right season. It's getting to be spring. It's beautiful out here. It's a really windy day. And I might want to review a fragrance, and might be in the certain mood to review, a fragrance in that time of that season, with maybe depending on how I feel. Another important thing I think to remember with a fragrance is to look at the concentration. Of course, I tell y'all the longevity, what I get on my skin, which is an important part of it, but it's only a suggestion. Your skin chemistry might be different, and everybody has different experiences. I've had fragrances last longer on me than others, and I've had a number of fragrances perform very poorly on my skin compared to other people. So it all really depends on you, and of course, you have to get out there and do testing for yourself. I'm only a guide in fragrances, but with the concentration of a fragrance, it's important to research the fragrance and know what you're getting into. Eau de toilette and EDT fragrance is going to have more top notes in general, and it's going to be a lesser concentration. So it's going to maybe project potential, especially if it's more of a fresh citrus, maybe a blue fragrance. It's going to project a lot more, but it might not last as long as an EDP. while the EDP is going to tend to have higher concentration, it doesn't mean that necessarily it's going to last longer. It all really depends on the notes. But EDPs do tend to last a little bit longer, but project a little bit less because of just how the notes, how they compose those kinds of fragrances, tend to have less of the top notes and more of the mid and more of the bass. So it's really interesting to look at the notes, smell the fragrances, and really try to figure out what's going on. Because the EDP could really project, an EDP fragrance could be poor longevity, and an EDT possibly could last a little bit longer and not project that well. It all depends on the fragrance. What kind of notes are we getting into? What's the concentration? And what was the perfumer's intent? One of the reasons I made this video today is to get to the perfumer's intent part of this discussion. I feel like it is important to acknowledge and respect the perfumer's intent with a fragrance. Certain fragrances are intended to create certain emotions. Sometimes, you see orange and maybe you think it's going to be a juicy orange or a juicy fig, or maybe you see a certain note and you see chocolate and you think it's going to be a Nutella chocolate. The perfumer might have intended something very different, and you do have to keep in mind what the perfumer was intending with the fragrance and try to rate and judge the fragrance based on what was the perfumer's actual intent. Were they true to form? Did they do what they wanted to? Maybe you say the fragrance is bad, and maybe the perfumer didn't do a good job because he made the fragrance have a bitter orange. Maybe you do not like the orange in Terre d'Hermès, but was that in the intention of the perfumer? I think that is an important thing to take into account. But even though that is an important thing to acknowledge, it's an important thing to be aware of, I think the most important thing is to acknowledge the smell. Even if a perfumer, in my humble opinion, even if a perfumer 100% perfectly creates a fragrance that they intended to make, let's say they tried to recreate the smell of mushrooms. Let's say they tried to recreate the smell of, I don't know, like bath water, or 100% tried to recreate the smell of something strange or something odd. You could let your imagination go anywhere. A bathroom curtain. Recreate anything. The smell of moss. Like more of like black mold with moss or something like that. Even though they might have been 100% true to form, they might have been a creative, artistic genius and did a wonderful thing with their creativity, and also with the synthetics coming out and getting their hands on those and using those in a masterful way, being an artisan of the craft. They might not smell great, and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. I think that there's a lot of fragrances that I review and a lot of fragrances that fragrance reviewers review, and they might not even understand or be aware of what the perfumer was actually intending with the fragrance. Maybe the perfumer wanted the fragrance to be a little bit more sour. A lot of us love sweet fragrances, and maybe that was not the fragrance. The perfumer didn't want there to be so much vanilla. Maybe they wanted to make an anti-gourmand and make it a little bit more salty and a little bit more dry. Maybe you expect a desert fragrance, and maybe they didn't put as much spices in it as you wanted to. Maybe they just made it a little bit more musky. Maybe that was the intent of the fragrance. The thing is, what really matters is if you like it or not. And finding that fragrance that you like. And I think paying attention to the history of the fragrance really matters once you connect to a fragrance and you want to learn even more about your fragrance that you love. A lot of diving into the rabbit hole of fragrance history is nice, but having more than 10 fragrances, I'll probably put you in the 100% of people deep into this hobby. If you're diving into fragrance history, you're one of probably 10,000 people or maybe so in the world who are really diving into fragrance history, learning the perfumes, of the brands and the history, and reading perfume books and the like. There's not a lot of people who do that. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like some people are taking it, I think, a little bit too seriously, where they want to focus more on the art of fragrances, which I love fragrances for art. I think that fragrance is an expression of emotion. I think fragrance helps you to express who you are. I think fragrance is a vehicle for, you know, showing the world who you are. It's a vehicle, and it helps you to be able to, you know, really put yourself out there in a possibly really, really big way, and adds to your whole outfit, it adds to your personality and to your emotion. So I definitely think fragrance is powerful, but I don't think that you know, it's as important, you know, to how the fragrance smells to a person as, you know, to the intent by the perfumer. If of course we want to be aware, but if, let's say, a fragrance gets very popular and everybody thinks a certain way about a fragrance, just because the perfumer made the fragrance and doesn't think it's a vanilla fragrance and everybody else thinks it's a vanilla fragrance, I don't think I think that I don't think the perfumer is discredited from his feelings and his opinion or his intent as, you know, creating a vanilla fragrance. But if everybody else doesn't feel like it's a vanilla fragrance, or vice versa, this is just purely an example. Um, I think that it should be spoken about, and people should be able to express their feelings and their experience with the fragrance. I just put this out there because some people have been focusing, or maybe just trying to discredit fragrance reviewers like myself, who maybe don't know all of the history and maybe don't pay attention to every nitty gritty detail that goes into fragrance reviewing. And I think it's kind of funny because I go into a lot more detail. I go into a lot. I do give y'all sneak peeks and snippets of fragrance history and of perfumers from time to time, and I dive into, you know, more of the notes than just, you know, a lot of the more than most reviewers. I'll say that, but, you know, a lot of people don't even want to hear about the notes. They just want to know about how it smells. You know, really criticizing fragrance reviewers for not knowing the history of every fragrance and the brands they're talking about, when, you know, you might not even be reviewing the brand or the house as a whole. You might just be talking about the fragrance. And honestly, I have people who they just watch 4 minutes on average of my videos. This is so far, I'm looking at the clock, it's over 12 minutes. The majority of people aren't going to be here at 12 minutes, and I've already lost most people watching this video. When you say or suggest that the average person, or maybe that the average person should, you know, have to hear about the artistry and a perfumer's history and the brand's history in the past and going forward, those things can be interesting and they can be relevant to a fragrance, but they don't have to be. They a lot of the times it's not necessary, especially if people just want an introduction to a fragrance. They're limited on time. They come to somebody like me to learn about a fragrance and to hear about a fragrance and to get an impression about how the fragrance smells and an impression on how it will last on their skin, what it might smell like on their skin, what other people are going to think about the fragrance, of course, with the compliment factor, which I started, which some big name reviewers are starting to use as well, but and the price, of course. But getting into the you know, the detailed nitty gritty of, you know, perfumers' history is not something that I am going to particularly do more in the future. I'm going to be about the same. I'm going to mention it whenever I feel like it's relevant and whenever I feel like it adds to the story. And you know, maybe it's something you might need as a viewer, or as a fragrance lover, you might need to be aware of. I just put this out there because, and honestly, I'm not even calling these people snobs. I'm not. What I'm doing is I'm trying to say that a lot of us need to be aware of what viewers want. This is YouTube. This is not history. I'm not writing a history book on a fragrance house. I am not writing a biography, an autobiography. What I'm doing here as a fragrance channel is helping you find a good fragrance, smell great, have some fun, hopefully, a couple laughs and a couple chuckles, and also, hopefully, you get to just, you know, find some fragrances that you really connect with. All kinds of different levels. That's what this is all about. Smelling good, feeling good, and being able to express yourself. That's what my motto is about. Wear what you love. So, I hope this wasn't too long of a rant of a video today. I hope this was enjoyable. Hope I didn't go rant too long. But My friends, what do you think about this topic? Let me know down below. What do you think about people who try to discredit fragrance reviewers like myself, who don't dive into all the history, who don't dive into every single detail about a fragrance brand and a fragrance house? What do you think about that? Is that something that you think is irrelevant always? Is that something that you think needs to be a focus? You know, some people really like to focus on the past and the history of brands and the history of fragrances. Is that something that's important to you? Let me know in the comment sections below. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear your opinions and your feelings on this topic. Let's get a conversation started. And if you've definitely watched the 15 minutes of this video, you're probably a big fan. So why don't you help me out? Why don't you like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share the video, and tell a friend. Anyways, I'll see you next time, my friends. I wish you the very best, and you know what it is. Wear what you love. I'll see you next time, everybody. Have a good one. Stay safe, be well, and peace out, my friends. And bye.